Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock. To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce the show with listener contributions from people like you. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at BroadwayDrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/Broadway Drumming 101 or through Venmo at Broadway Drumming 101. Or help keep us caffeinated by buying us a cup of coffee or a week's worth at buymeacoffee.com/BD101. That's buymeacoffee.com/BD101. We appreciate any support you can give. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.
You later went on, later in 2002, to be the drummer for a new show called Hairspray. How did you go about getting that show?
Well, Hairspray, so the MD and the contractor wanted me there. The MD I had worked with already, and yourself that oftentimes if an MD is comfortable with you, they want you there the next time, and that's one way. So in this case, Lon Hoyt was the MD, and he Mark Shaman I did not know. And he wasn't weighing in. It was John Miller's show, and he did want me there. I had worked with the choreographer on Rocky Horror, Jerry Mitchell, but Jerry was working with somebody else at the time, so that wasn't necessarily the ticket. I think it was Lon and John at the time. That's how I got involved with that, and. That was a good experience. It ran for, I think, 6.5 years. It was my longest show. It was wildly successful early on, and ultimately I did the movie. Not the original. There was an original movie that this show was based on, and then there was a movie that was based on the show. And I did that, and then I did Hairspray live a number of years ago, and so it was kind of the gift that kept giving. And I was that again. Mark had some demos. He never played them for me, and he said, "Do your thing." And so I drew from, it was 60s based, but there was also stuff that was 70s ish. So that's how that worked. It was, we went to Seattle. There was a good band there, and then we were there for 6 weeks, and then brought it here.
So, since it was such a successful show, I'm sure you probably had a lot of people reaching out to you to try to sub for you.
Yeah.
What were the criteria that you used in order to make sure that the person that you're going to bring in was qualified to be a sub for you at Hairspray?
It's a really good question, and a question that I'm sure you've had to answer yourself. What could work here? For any show, you have to get somebody who can follow a conductor, right? You have to, even if it's on click, which Hairspray was, let's say, maybe 70% on click or something. Maybe a little more, but yeah. So you don't necessarily have to watch them all. But then there are times the click disappears. There places you have to get somebody who can watch a conductor. I think right now that eliminates 98% of the drummers that I know. When you recommend somebody, it's your reputation. Then you have to have a sense that this person stylistically can pull off what it is that needs to be pulled off, and that their vibe is not going to be troubling to anybody. You know, they're friendly enough and they're prompt. There's no issue there. Now you got other factors: geography, availability. You know, could they help you in a pinch? So I do things where I would use a smaller number of subs and give them a lot more work, rather than a large number of subs and give them very little work, because there'd be times that I might need help, and they were perfectly happy to help because it was an account for them, right? Now the other thing is, you know, how are they going to prepare this show? The sub job on Broadway is the hardest. Subbing on a drum chair on Broadway is the hardest job that I've ever done in music. Period. End of story. You know, and I've only subbed on, I think, 3 different shows in my life. It was all the hardest thing. So, you know, what do you look for there? There's one guy that I used a lot who would karaoke, you know, more or less. He would cop the fills, he'd cop the grooves, he'd study that stuff, and he'd come in and he'd play everything sort of verbatim. And he did a good job of it. So nobody had a problem with it, you know? And even then, it's not going to sound like you. You know, I don't know if that's good or bad, but, you know, it's a hard job, right? A drummer defines every single beat of music for everybody, everywhere, on top of the stage and underneath. So even if you're playing to the click, even if I came in and sub for you on Ain't Too Proud, I could cop everything that you play, and it won't sound like you. He doesn't play as loud in that spot that you did. Shit, I watched him so many times, and I listened to and I didn't get that? No. He doesn't play that loud. You're playing too loud in that spot. Oh, he plays louder in that spot. What are you doing? Dynamics are the hardest thing to reproduce, because they just are. You know, you hear them one way when you're preparing and you think, but now the other thing is the balance within the kit. I had a guy come in to Beautiful and subbed, and he you know how you distribute things dynamically within your hands and your feet, and this is the mix of the kit. This was one situation where the guy said, the MD said, it just doesn't sound, I mean, the bass drum is super loud and whatever, and not unmusical, just too different, you know. Hairspray had some challenging things. I never played something to make it challenging for challenging's sake, ever. I tried to make it stylistically appropriate, and I always had the sub in mind too. I tried not to go for things that were too complicated, but there was some demanding stuff in that show. Like Francisco played that show, and what he played was so complicated, but that's how his brain works, you know. It doesn't sound complicated when he plays it, but guys would come in and just pare it down, and the MD was fine with that. You just got the meat of it. With my thing, they had to do a little, you know, some of those faster fills were part of the music, and they had to get that. So anyway, those were among the considerations, right? There's a lot of them.
Hairspray, wildly successful, runs until 2009. You get another show, if I'm not mistaken, Everyday Rapture.
Yeah, man, you've done your homework. It took me a while to remember the order of things. So, but in that period of time, things had happened. I was on the road on and off during Hairspray. I got Art Garfunkel's gig, and we're going out and doing gigs with him, and then a singer, Linda Eder, and she was a fine singer, more theatrical based. Anyway, both of these artists were touring, and then those gigs and Hairspray went away. Michael Keller had offered me the production of West Side Story that was happening at that time. And like an idiot, I turned it down because Art and Linda had a bunch of gigs, and I was sort of happy to be emancipated but really working, doing road gigs. Then the road gigs went away. So there was a good period of time there where I wasn't doing a show. I mean, it was maybe the better part of a year. And it had been the first time in a while that was the case. And so I think I subbed. I may have my chronology wrong, but I think I subbed for Warren Oates. He had the Frank Sinatra show, Come Fly Away, or something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, but yes, Everyday Rapture was a limited run on Broadway, maybe 6 weeks or something like that. And yeah, that was the next thing. It didn't run a long time, but it wasn't supposed to.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was a limited run. Yeah. You
got a call to do a show about airplane pilots called Catch Me If You Can.
Yes.
It's a great movie from what I remember. I didn't see the show. Did you like the show?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. Catch Me did not run long. It wasn't the success everybody expected it should have been, because everybody was involved in Hairspray. The actor won best, the Tony for best male in the musical, and almost everybody was the same. But there was one person that wasn't, and that was the writer. And somehow the story was deemed less compelling. There were people involved who had an idea of what it should be, and that was going to be different than the movie, which, you can't argue with the movie. The movie was masterful. There was great music to play in this, and I loved playing it. Band was on stage. It was big bandy. There were things that were swing. There were things that New Orleans. There were rock things. It was a great all around thing, but it went away after about 4 months.
Tell me about your first time playing on the Tony Awards.
Actually, I've only done the actual ceremony once. I can't remember what it was. Either Hairspray or Catch Me, but I can't remember which one. I'm pretty sure it was one of those two. But I have done the recordings before, and and you probably have too, right? Where you yeah. So oftentimes they'll have a guy who plays a drummer who's there in the orchestra, in the Tony's orchestra, but they'll often bring in a drummer who is familiar with the show, so the MD and the drummer can come in. Maybe there are others, but maybe not, and do the recording session. And it's not hard because you've been doing it, and you do one song, I think, typically, and that's that.
What is your experience in doing cast recordings, and how is that different from doing a jingle from back in the day?
Oh yeah, well, jingles are short. You might do a 15-second, 30-second, 60-second, 90-second, whatever. But it's one session, you're done, and it usually doesn't, it was usually an hour. With a cast recording, as you well know, you might have a couple days in the studio. Some have been more pleasant experiences than others, and it kind of depends on things that are beyond our pay grade. How much do they care? It used to be that they would make you play with the singers live. I mean, the Footloose thing, we'd be doing take after take after take because the singers, might have had an issue, and we were playing it live. This was the same, record where they refused to do a click. And that, I think it was really more common for musicians and singers to be playing cast albums live, which was in and of itself an enormous pain in the butt. But that I think is mostly different now, as people have come to know that these, for isolation purposes, for, sanity purposes, you concentrate on music and then you do vocals afterward. So in a general sense, they're usually pretty pleasant. The music is already, they might be tweaking things arrangement wise. You get a decent level, your basic parts, and you go in and do them.
There are common threads between all the musicians that have done shows that have been successful over a long period of time. And one of those is to be able to play multiple types of music and take all that knowledge and distill it in the form of a Broadway show. And when you get to do a Broadway show, it gets distilled and then distilled again.
Yeah.
And
you're
like, wait, what's this?
Yes, that's right. And it's important to recognize that. See, that's the thing that I think most guys don't know. Again, we go back, right? But Warren Oates calls it almost music, right? So, he's calling it almost. And the reason why, he's one of the wittiest guys I know, but one of the reasons why he calls it almost music is exactly what you just said. So let's say the composer comes up with a great idea, and here's what it is. Well, automatically now, if it's in a show setting, you might not be playing it at an authentic volume level. If you were playing it in a club or in a concert or whatever, or a recording session, you'd be playing it. Now you've shrunken that down. Is it important to know that? I think it is. Yes, I think it's important to know that, because now you're going to, you want to bring all the intensity that you can and all the intent, but you have to pare down the volume. So you should be aware of that. If you're not aware of that and you think that's the go-to thing, then you might play like a pussycat.
That's going to be the theme of this podcast. Don't play like a pussycat.
Yeah, so intensity, and then now you have dialogue. Oh, well, we want underscoring. Okay, so now you're shrinking this down to something so the person can be heard speaking. And then you have dancers. Now they're gonna have you play on the and of two in a way that completely fucks up the groove, because people are looking on the stage and they're seeing a kick or whatever, and that's your gig. But you should know, right, that's kind of weird. They injected it in for that reason.
That happened to me at Ain't Too Proud, and people in the pit were actually wondering, why is this happening? Like the bridge of My Girl, where it goes into the string and string and horn line, and you start playing it, then halfway through we have to go down to piano because there's a line that Smokey Robinson says to the Temptations, or says to David Ruffin, I think. And it's like, man, that was the best part of the song, but we had to play it like, really, really soft. And there are reasons for that. When you see the show, you understand it. But when you're in the pit, you're like, it gets distilled. That's the whole distilling process of music to a musical.
Yes, that's right. You've got all of those things going on. And then, another thing is, when I'm playing gig, and I do, as I said, I embrace the click, and I like to use it for reference. And sometimes I'll even use it for the first few bars of its song, so I can, and then I like to turn it off and play. And then if you listen to the recording and you run the click, there are very few guys who are going to stay with it from beginning to end. But, it's hopefully it will have a certain proximity. But that's because you're doing a gig. And it's only about you guys on the stage, right? So in a show, you're rounding off things to here's the tempo. We're going to pick this tempo. The song moved a little in different places, and I've heard you point out that it feels much better, and I don't disagree with you. But in a circumstance like that, it becomes much harder for a sub to try and reproduce those things, because it becomes family secrets. Like, you guys play it all the time. So this is going to move faster. This is going to move slower. You don't even think about it. A guy coming in is like, what the fuck is happening here? Why is this faster? Why is this? Well, that's just how it developed. And so, it becomes much harder for that sub. So yeah, distilled down. Yeah, that's the nature of that beast.
Bonnie and Clyde, Jesus Christ Superstar, Jekyll and Hyde, Soul Doctor, then Beautiful, the Carole King musical, another smash hit.
Beautiful. Yeah.
That ran for 5 years. 5 years.
5 years. Yeah,
that is very long time for a musical. I'm sure you had a chance to meet and hang out with Carole King.
She came, and I did know, not her. We actually played with her the show. We did one of those early morning shows where you're outside and you're playing, and it's winter and you feel like your hands are going to break. I actually played with gloves on, like winter gloves on. But anyway, she played with us, and yes, she came, and that was one of those experiences, like Hairspray. I didn't think Hairspray was going to run. I didn't think Beautiful was going to run. I thought that Hairspray was like, okay, so let's get this straight. Like, the lead is a really, really heavy girl with a squeaky-ish voice, and the other lead is a guy who, for no particular reason, is wearing a dress the whole show, and he talks like this, and that's going to somehow capture the hearts and minds of America, right? No, I don't think so. And then, of course, it did. And Beautiful, I thought, was going to appeal primarily to, suburban, New York women. And I thought it was it's a good story and beautiful songs, but I just thought that the demographic wasn't what it turned out to be. You never know.
That's the key. One of the keys to Broadway is that you never know.
Yeah, we didn't win for Best Musical. We won a few Best Somethings, including Best Actress. But there was another show that took it, that was kind of a sleeper of a show, and it gave it a little more of a life. And I think that there are lots of thoughts about that, but whatever. It had already become successful and made its money back within a year, which most shows don't do. And, it was doing well. One point I wanted to make, just from a drum standpoint, about Beautiful. Carole King songs, beautiful, beautiful songs. The drums, I tried to make the drum parts as musical and sparse, and the fills were nothing complicated. And I tried to make it in the character of the music. I think we all try and do that, right? And I was conscious that when subs, I was conscious about subs, always was conscious about subs, that the position of the monitor, the position of the music stands, the drums, the positioning of the cymbals, even, and that when guys came in to learn the show, it was going to be a basic show. If I had done a little more with one thing or another, not when they were there, and it wasn't the expectation. I think about the subs a lot when I'm developing a drum part, because I want it to be sub friendly. I think that's very important, and I know that there are guys who aren't necessarily as concerned about that, and it can be very difficult for their subs. And I think maybe even there are some guys who know that, and I don't applaud that. I think that if your setup becomes and your parts become unnecessarily complicated, or electronics become unnecessarily complicated, I think you're doing a big disservice to the show and to the guys that you have coming in that are supposed to be, holding up your contribution while you're not there. That's my own thought. Look, if sound designers could have it their own way, sometimes I know one in particular, and he works a lot, and I like him very much, and he's good. But he would much prefer everything to be on Roland V drums, because what those guys really want is the ability to control and isolate and have everything sort of squashed and whatever. So the whole idea of we need this snare drum here, but then we need this snare drum there. By the time they're done, your various snare drums are going to be barely discernible, maybe sometimes not at all discernible. The fact that you chose this vintage kit because it was of that vintage period, and you and I have talked about this, that what the guys, the sound designers want, and the guys who are mixing and guys, et cetera, they don't want your bass drum to ring a long period of time. They don't want your snare drum to ring. They don't want the toms to ring too long. And by the time they're done compressing it and muffling it and putting it through the house, which is going to be underneath the singers and mixed in with the band, you're not going to fucking know the difference between snare drum A and snare drum B, unless it's like, okay, this is where I have this tiny little thing and it's tuned up, high as a kite and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, or a marching snare drum, if it's
right.
Marching.
Perhaps, right? Yeah. But for the most part, go with more simple and understand what the final product is going to be, not how much you might be impressing, other drummers, or what it would be if it was your record and your gig, but what the whole picture is and what it's ultimately going to sound like out there.
If you're going in and you're creating a new show called, Rush, the 2112 musical. Now, that's not a good example because you're going to have a big drum set. Whatever show. And you want to make it interesting for yourself so that you don't get bored, and you want to have the electronics, and you have 2 snares over here and your main snare and 6 cymbals and a splash and, a marimba, and just to make it more interesting for yourself. I guess that's one way of doing it. And sometimes you might have to do that if you don't have a percussionist and they want to combine everything. So I guess that's a whole different conversation. Yeah,
then you may have a hybrid book. I think the hardest show I ever did to learn, I only did 3 shows as a sub. I subbed on Next to Normal and then ultimately took over the chair. Damian Bassman had originated that part, and a bunch of the songs, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, were songs that Tom Kitt, who had a band, and Damian was in that band, and they used to play those songs. And Damian is a terrific percussionist, so he had orchestra bells sort of above the hi-hat, and there were vibes right behind me, and then one timpani over that way. And there were some really tricky things. It took me a good 2 solid months of practicing because it had been a long time since I had played mallets, and I was never a great mallet player. I mean, I did my scales and whatever, and I could play things in college, but that was when it ended, so anything else was just hit a bell here, hit a bell there, that kind of thing. This was like, Damian had worked out something where it was like, a cymbal part mixed in with orchestra bells, and you had ding, ding, ding. It was really kind of tricky. And he loved it, and he's good at that. I don't think it was sub-friendly, and the vibes part wasn't 4 mallets, it was 2 mallets, but there were some, a bunch of arpeggios and stuff like that. So that was hard to do, and that was a high British book. That there are times when electronics might be fully warranted, where you really need another sound of a kit altogether. And I think Tommy Igoe had an electronic kit and a regular acoustic kit, and he did that for reasons because the sounds were actually very, very different. And he would go over to that kit and play the electronics at one point, and that made sense. Or if you need sounds that are really super processed and you don't want to sort of leave it to them to figure out how to do that, that's another justification. Or, sound effects or whatever. So, yeah, I would say, but do it judiciously and when necessary, and make it easy for subs and yourself to dial that up when needed, and and move through it. Don't make it complicated. I'll tell you a very quick story. When I was subbing for Sean on Saturday Night Live, he had to trigger a sequencer as the beginning of, it was like, live from New York. It's Saturday night. And Sean would hit a pedal next to his hi-hat, and it would start a sequencer, and you'd play along with it, right? There would be clicks, and I can't remember the specifics, but anyway, it's kind of an archaic little pedal setup that he had. He could work it fine. He never had a hitch. So there were two rehearsals or so. One included the dress rehearsal, which had an audience, and then there was a show. And live from New York is Saturday night. Hit the thing, everything's fine. Rehearsal 1. In the dress rehearsal, same thing. Hit the pedal, everything's fine. The show, as Ashton Kutcher is the guest, and he's doing this monologue in his underwear, and he's like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Anyway, it's really funny. And live from New York, it's Saturday night, and I hit the pedal, and nothing happened. And I hit the pedal again, and nothing happened. And then I hit it again, and it triggered. Now, the period of time felt like an eternity. And certainly everybody knew that the music hadn't started yet. And it wasn't an eternity, but it was long enough, So I passed this along to anybody who might be using, electronics, to be very conscious of the effectiveness and the ease with which that stuff is workable.
I often ask this to many of my guests. What are some things drummers should never do in a Broadway pit?
You got to keep your focus. So if it's early on and you got a big break, be careful if you're going to, divert to reading something you're reading or something you're looking at with your phone or whatever. Be alert. The obvious things, like any gig, be aware of everything that you've come to know when you were preparing, and stay focused and don't talk. Don't start conversations with people. You don't know if you're going to be razzing somebody who needs to, if you're right next to somebody and, you just stay focused. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
There's one other thing that I thought of when you say what shouldn't a drummer or what should a drummer, what shouldn't he do? It's good for him to be seated and in the pit early if he's subbing.
What should a sub drummer on a Broadway show never do?
I think that a sub drummer, when he comes in, he should be there early, seated, ready to rock, and not be playing. If he's going to be playing, maybe on a pad. If the drummer has a pad there, but don't do a lot of playing because it annoys people. I noticed that there's certain subs that come in sometimes. I mean, I'm not there when sub drummers come, but there's certain subs that come in on other instruments, and they're playing a lot before the show. I mean, if they have to tune and they got to do a little whatever, cool. But if it goes on for a while, it can be annoying, and people, become annoyed. They want to go there to sit down and get their thing together, and then do the thing. Also, make sure that chances are, if they're avions and they're personalized and people have their own mix, that's great. But if you change something, change it back. Change a setting, change an angle of the kit, and don't leave stuff there. Brought a drink in or whatever, take it.
Sandwich wrappers and throwing the garbage in the corner and
yeah. And I think also this goes back to the subs and choosing what they might do when they're playing. Be very, very, very careful what you change. That there, as you have articulated, there are times during a rehearsal or previews, or maybe beyond, where you play something, and you might even work it into a fill. Let's say it's a dance accent or something that goes along with something they're singing. If all you're doing as a sub is isolating the music and saying, oh, well, when that fill comes, I'll play in the spirit of that fill, but it's going to be a different fill. You're making a decision that might actually affect something on the stage. Be careful about that. If there's a groove, be careful about injecting something into that groove or adding ghost notes where there aren't, or taking ghost notes away where there are. Just be careful about that, because all that stuff is for better or for worse, very familiar to everybody. You don't have to karaoke it. You don't have to, but there's a process by which you figure out where you can and can't. And it's better to start more, not necessarily karaokeing, but really, really, really paying homage to the guy that you've learned the show from.
You've done several shows over the many decades. Do you watch your own show from the audience?
Mostly I don't, and the reason for that is because if you do that, the experience we have in the pit is very focused, and you're hearing every little thing that everybody else does, and what especially what you want to hear. You've dialed your mix, you're tuning, and you know what you do, and you know what you've brought to that, and you know that when you play this little figure on the hi-hat, it's that you know all these little things, and you go out in the audience and you listen, and you can't hear like 65% of it. It's heartbreaking, so have I done it? I have done it, but in a general sense, we're dealing with a medium where the vocals and the talking and all of that takes such precedent over the music that the mix that you don't subject yourself to, you don't have to hear, like what you might hear on a cast album. A cast album, which is like, where they mix the vocals louder than any other area of music ever. I don't know whose idea this was, but like the band is puny often, and the vocals are so freaking loud that when you want to hear something in the band, you have to turn it up, and your ears are practically bleeding from the vocals. They don't do this in opera, opera is a vocal-based medium, but for some reason you can hear the orchestra better. The mix is higher. So, when you're in the pit, I prefer just sort of to stay there and hear this vocal and pretend it's a gig, right?
Do you go back and ever listen to any cast albums that you've done?
No.
No?
I don't, because again, it's the same experience. I mean, if I had to learn there was one time I was doing this gig at 54 Below for a then not well-known Ben Platt, who became the guy, you know. And he decided to do, and you'll know this, I Can't Stand Still from Footloose. You probably don't remember this.
I forgot it, yeah. It's like I sketched that out of my brain.
Yeah, well, you probably blocked it out of your memory for self-preservation. It's not a bad song. It's not a bad song, but it was kind of kitschy, and Ben wanted to do it. And I had no idea what I had done, and I had to listen to that. But other than a reference, generally listening to cast albums, because of how they're mixed, not because of not because of the songs that were written or anything, but the ultimate mix that people seem to prefer, it winds up being an uncomfortable experience. I'm more or less, I can tell you that I'm good with my playing on these records. I'm good with it. And sometimes I'd be fine, you know, for somebody to say, well, how does Clint de Ganon play? Let's listen to what he did on, you know, on Bonnie and Clyde's, you know. So they didn't run long. A lot of fun to play. I'd be fine with it, but you know, as an experience of myself, and no, not so much.
If there's one record that exemplifies Clint de Ganon, and you'd say, you know what, you need to listen to this, would that be the record behind you? Or the record to the side, the West Side Story one, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, West Side Story, I'm proud of, and I'd be fine for you to listen to that. But would I say that was stylistically sort of coming from my heart? No, I mean, obviously, a clear, an obvious example of a music that I did not originate. Although I was able to play on a couple of songs, stuff that I wanted to play. And if you know that show, I can explain what those things were. But you know, recently, I don't know if you are friends with Peter Erskine. But he was doing a thing on Facebook, maybe Instagram too, I'm not sure, of infinity drum. He would call it infinity drummers. And he would just take a drummer and sometimes you would know the guy, of course, and then other times it might be somebody that you weren't as familiar with. And he did one for me, which was incredibly flattering. It was after the West Side Story. And he took a record that I'd played on like 20 years ago, was on a label called DMP, where I did a few records. And this was Warren Bernhardt, the great piano player, Warren Bernhardt. Chuck Loeb had produced it. And I can't remember the name of the song, but anyway, I went back and listened to it because he had singled it out. It was very, very nice of him. And I liked it. I was happy with it. That doesn't always happen. So then there's also, there have been a couple of records that I played on with Hiram Bullock that I liked a bunch of tracks that were on that. If you took records that I've played on, I could probably pick a song versus the whole record, you know, that I'd say, oh yeah, listen to this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you have the same experience where sometimes you listen to something and you say, okay, that was pretty good. And that's usually the best it's going to get for me. Okay, that was pretty good. I'm not uncomfortable with it. Versus like something, well, if I could have done that again, I would. You know, that kind of thing.
So there's a poster of West Side Story behind you.
Yeah.
You did the movie and the soundtrack.
Yes, the soundtrack was the thing that was a very special experience, and the movie was kind of a fluky thing where we need a band to be simulating in my case what I had played in the recording studio. In the actual movie, there's a scene in the gym where the Jets and the Sharks are there, and it's a dance at the gym, and there's so there was a band there, and I was one of the musicians that was, you know, in that, and we did get credit on the movie in the role, but unfortunately for the recording sessions, we did not get we did not get credit, as most musicians don't. I had wished that they had put at least the soloists, in that, because it was one of the most amazing experiences of my career. I had never played West Side Story before, and I had worked with the music producer before and the contractor, and they said, "Would you like to do this?" And it took me a minute to say yes, because I did not want to put myself in a position of I knew the music was hard, and it was the New York Philharmonic ultimately, and Gustavo Dudamel, and rock star conductor. But these guys are. They've played West Side Story. There's a drummer who has played West Side Story with them a bunch, and I wasn't that guy. But ultimately it worked out well. They did it in 3 parts. First part was playing the whole score. I call it the world's most expensive demo. They did the whole score with some ringers and some members of the Phil and some members of the Met, and a great conductor, a composer, who ultimately got arrangement credit on West Side Story, named David Newman. And then they shot the movie, so the actors could sing to this world's most expensive demo and dance to it and whatever. And then we did the music again, this time with the Phil proper and Dudamel conducting. And COVID shut us down. There were about 3 sessions left. And so there's a drummer on the West Coast who played prologue and a couple of incidental things. But I had done the rest of it here.
I need to go see that movie. I hear it's really good.
Good, and the sound is good. And Spielberg came to the drum booth once. He was walking around with his handheld. He apparently does that on his movies. But we thought he might be getting footage for the making of West Side Story. That was what we were told. And there's a song in there called "Cool." And "Cool" features the drums, and there are drum breaks. And so at that point, he came to the drum booth, and I'm trying to concentrate on playing, and there's Spielberg outside of the plexi like this, and he opens the door for the next take and comes up to me, and he's standing right here with his handheld while I'm going da 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 da, and Spielberg's there, and I could barely keep it together, Clayton. It was, it was, he's a lovely guy. It was very flattering, but I was kind of freaked,
There are times where I've done gigs or shows, and people that I've looked up to are watching me play. And for a few minutes there, it makes me feel a certain way. I get intimidated, but then I realize that, I'm on the gig and it's my gig. Do you get rattled in situations like that, or other times where there are people that you've grown up listening to? Say, for instance, if Buddy Rich was still alive,
yeah,
and he came to see you play, would you be like, "Oh man, Buddy Rich is here," and would you change anything, or you? How do you approach situations like that?
I have become conscious of at times where there are musicians that I love who are listening. Listen, man, one time I was playing with Gordon Edwards and Stuff. And I can give you a few of these examples, but this one, and Gad is in the audience, and Purdy's in the audience. I'm done. There was another time when it was a tribute. Cornell Dupree had passed, and it was at B.B. King's, and Steve Jordan had put this whole thing together. And Steve said to Gordon, "Would you like, Chris and Steve to be playing?" Cornell was in the band, and Gordon said, "No, this is my band now." And I was the drummer. So I got up to play with Stuff Gordon Edwards and stuff, after Steve and Chris had played together in Chris's band. He brought up Steve to play with him as a guest. Gad was standing on the side the whole time when I was playing, and there were 2 other drum sets on the stage. Fortunately, I didn't know he was there. I didn't know he was standing there on the stage. But I guess the answer to your question is, it's very difficult during those times to really, tune out, heroes and not be aware that they're listening to you, which of course is the worst thing you can possibly do, but it's human.
If you were going to advise somebody on what you need to know, or like how to become a success as a Broadway musician, like what would you tell somebody that's graduated from college and I'm about to get out of Berkeley or Juilliard or whatever you're going to conservatory? That's not North Texas State anymore. It's University of North Texas. These drummers that come out of there, man, I'm moving to New York.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Well, what I'm gonna say is not necessarily. It's just the way I've approached it, but I'm not advocating it per se. But I really, really, really think that when you set your eye on money, on a job that's going to make money, it doesn't generally work well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, prepare yourself in every possible way you can for every possible situation. But be the best drummer you can be. Be the best musician you can be, and learn a million different kinds of styles and do a million different kinds of gigs. And sure, if you can get into sub, or you might be able to get a tour, or you play some show. Like I played one of the first shows, if not the first show I ever played, was Godspell in Fishkill, New York. I mean, it probably paid like $74 a show. But take those things. Like, I mean, look, when you think about it, you have to, and I watched Michael Keller talk about this on your podcast. You got to cut your teeth. He was talking about subbing for people or taking a tour. I mean, don't start, if you want to be a great lawyer, or you want to be a great advertising man, or you want to be a great doctor, you don't say, listen, I know you're strategizing on how you're going to fight, this thing if you're an attorney, or how you're going to perform brain surgery. Can I just go and watch you? No, you know what? Take lessons, maybe. Study with people. Go to shows. Take off Broadway gigs. Get in any conductible situation you possibly can so you can figure that out. Make sure you play well with a click. Listen to as many different kinds of styles as you can. And yeah, if you want, listen to some cast records or whatever, but don't make that the goal. Don't make it the goal. Be the best drummer you can be so that people are interested in, there's some great drummers doing Broadway shows now. There's some really great drummers. They're great at other things. They're not, people want them because they're great drummers, not because they're great show drummers. Right? So my advice is to be as well-rounded and as great a musician as you can possibly become. You'll be more attractive to any gig, including shows. Does that make sense?
Amen.
Yeah. There's one story I'll tell you very quickly that I was doing a rehearsal with John Miller's band. And I got a phone call at 10:04 in the afternoon from Will Lee, who said, "Can you come to Radio City right now and play Sir Duke with Stevie Wonder?" And I was like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said to the guys, "You understand, right?" They said, "Yes, we understand." I was I was riding a motorcycle at the time. I had fucked up clothes, and I ran and Stevie was there, and he was kind of pissed because the guys that they were supposed to do this weren't doing the job. And I had played that music. I was familiar with that music, right? I don't know how many times I had played Sir Duke. And then, Sir Duke became 3 more songs because he liked what he was hearing.
Wow.
So we had a total 4 songs. That was Tony Bennett's 91st birthday party. It was a really nice situation, but you got to be ready. I think you got to be ready and just become the best musician you can be. So when these things happen, and they can happen quickly and on a high level, hopefully, you'll be ready to rock. That should be a lesson. That it's more about becoming a great drummer, and if this thing comes your way or you want to move toward it, you have a lot to bring to the table.
If you had to pick your top 5 drummers of all time, who would that be, or who would they be?
This question has become harder as I've gotten older, because when I was younger and when I came into the city, let's say, I was, you could hear so many great musicians all the time. The guys that were really influencing me back then. First, the guy that I remember being one of my heroes early on, there was Ringo. And then oddly, I'm all over the board here. There was, I became a Buddy fanatic. And then but as time went on, and I was listening to more, and I loved Billy Cobham, loved him. And then Tony Williams, when I heard, that was like my gateway record to jazz, was Miles Davis 4 and More. And I heard Tony Williams, and I was like, oh my God. The working drummers in New York City, I call them the 3 Steves. So there was Gadd, there was Jordan, and Ferroni. They were all like doing gigs all the time around me. I could go hear them at any point. Guys like, Erskine. It was a rich, rich period. And lots of other great drummers. But, Gadd and Jordan and Ferroni were so special in their ways. It was of that time period, and the music being made in New York. When I first heard Steve Jordan, he was playing with the 24th Street Band, which ultimately became the Letterman Band. They were hugely successful in Japan, and people knew him in New York. It was Will Lee and Hiram Bullock and Steve Jordan and Clifford Carter. And then Paul Schaefer, brought Will and Hiram and Steve in. Anyway, those were guys I loved listening to. But as time has gone on, and I've embraced so many different kinds of drummers, and feels have become a thing. And I think when you're young, you don't really understand feel as much. You might respond to it, but you don't really know. But there are too many now to name.
I never knew that information about the Steve Jordan and Hiram and Will, the 24th Street Band. Were they playing?
Yeah. And when I was young, I used to go hear them at 7th Avenue South, which was a great club that had great music all the time. And you could hear, like French Toast was a band that Weckel was playing in, and Peter Erskine would play there with, like Don Grolnick and at 24th Street Band. And the Brecker Brothers would play. The Brecker Brothers co-owned the club. And so, you could hear Sanborn there. You could hear Michel Camilo, I think, and, but 24th Street Band, I used to go hear as much as I could. It was that band, and I remember being very young, and Will Lee was so kind to me back then. I mean, we've since become, we played together in a number of different circumstances, and I love playing with him. He's fantastic. But at that point, I was a kid, and I said, man, I love the 24th Street Band. He gave me the 3 24th Street Band records, which were made in Japan. And this was a great freaking band. And Hiram and Will develop their whole partnership thing. You could see that. They were the first guys I knew to play wireless, and they would dance all over the club and run outside on the street and still be playing while Jordan was holding down the fort, and Jordan was and is unbelievable. Now he's with the Stones and sounds fantastic. Anyway, those were early influences.
So tell me about why was the 24th Street Band? Were they doing something on 24th Street?
Oh, I think that one or more of them lived on 24th Street. I think that's what that was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a great band, man. So cool.
You're mentioning all of these players, and when I got to New York in 1993, it was a little bit too late for me to be part of Mikell's because that closed down. I didn't know about 7th Avenue South until that closed down. Manny's Car Wash was still happening. There was a club called the Metropolitan Room or Club, and it was a restaurant
or something. Yeah, it was on. Was it First Avenue?
On the Upper East Side. Yeah, and I used to go there and see all kind of people, and there was the bottom line and the bitter end. And okay, it's 2022 now. Maybe I should ask some of these young people. It's like there's got to be something happening where the next generation of musicians are all doing some things. Because I remember hearing stories when I used to take lessons from Tommy Campbell. You had, because he would talk about jazz players. Yeah. And on any given night, there is Thelonious Monk here and Miles Davis over here and Sonny Rollins over here. And, everyone was doing something. And then in your era, there was, all these people that you're mentioning that you work with. And in my era, I had people that I came up with, but, there's got to be people that are out now. I'm just curious where things are happening. I know that the pandemic kind of screwed everything up for everybody, but now
it's coming back.
Yeah, people can go out and make music again. I know that Rockwood Music Hall is one place where people are doing things. Do you know, where the other places are?
Bitter End is still, and I play there. I think we almost have what might be considered a residency, maybe once every month and a half or month, but it's still going, and you can hear bands there. There's still some bands in town, and there are jazz clubs too, and they're still active. And I think the Vanguard is back, right? And so and Birdland is still going, and
Iridium,
Blue Note, Iridium, right? So for sure, we still have more than they do in L.A. The L.A. guys tell me that there's still more clubs and more people playing them here. One of the things I worry about with younger drummers is the whole, online thing. And you can learn a lot from people who are showing you stuff and playing. And people do a lot of with play-alongs, and they post a lot of stuff with them playing alone. And I worry a lot about people who have come to music and sort of embrace music and are involved with music on a solitary level too much of the time. That's a fear I have. It's a communicative thing. It involves other people. How you play is directly affected by things you're hearing in the moment. If those moments are rehearsed, it has nothing to do with what you're going to be doing in the real world. So, just like when we're talking, what I say affects you, what you say affects me. Music is that. And people need to really, I think, keep that in mind now more than ever, because now more than ever, you can lose sight of that.
Endorsements that you have, you said you did the Yamaha, was it Yamaha Night at NAMM? What's it called again?
Yeah, Yamaha had Groove Night. I've been a Yamaha artist for a long while. And Zildjian and ProMark drumsticks. The heads that I'm using and have used for a while are Attack heads. It's always an eyebrow raiser because people think that they're kind of somehow cut rate heads, and they're not. But I like to use the word boutique. But anyway, they have a heads that are where they kind of get the material from the same place. The Mylar heads are from the same place that Remo does, and so I've been using attack heads for a long time, and those are my main endorsements.
What projects are you working on now? And do you have anything that you are promoting?
Well, so the things that I do now are sort of spread out amongst a few different artists and projects. So for the last few years, I've been playing the music for the Amazon series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And I still am doing that. I'm also doing on-camera stuff. They have an on-camera band that will be for shown next season. So that is keeping me somewhat busy because they're kind of in full swing now. I work with Paul Schaefer, who was formerly the music director for the David Letterman show, and we've been doing his symphony shows. We just did one in Southern California in Long Beach. We did one in Vancouver. We're about to do one in another one in Canada. I hope that we'll bring it closer to home. I have a gig at Carnegie Hall coming up with the New York Pops. I guest with them sometimes. I love playing with them. There's an artist named Brian Stokes Mitchell, who's a fantastic singer, and I'm in his band and work with him both with his small group and on orchestra shows. I did I did one song for Steve Martin's show, Only Murders in the Building. So that's a song that was produced for that show. And Halston, there's a series Halston, and I worked on that. Then there's John Miller has a band, and I play in that band. We play every few months. Tony Conniff, he's another bass player leader, and he has a band, and I play with that band. Larry Saltzman's in that band, by the way, and that's at the bitter end, and that's monthly. Those are the things that I'm doing right now, and recordings wherever and whenever. And I have a studio in my house here on the other side of this wall, and I do projects for people, and they send me their tracks, and I play along. Did a few of those records recently. That's me.
And where can people find you on social media?
So I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. And I'm so lame, I don't have a website, but I do post stuff on Facebook, and I make it public now almost all the time. That took me a while to figure that out. And Instagram, I'm putting stuff there. And when I have gigs, like I did one with a guitar player named Sean Harkness. We did a gig recently at Birdland, and I'll post about the gigs, the local gigs, the gigs that aren't local before they happen. Usually.
Sounds like you're doing amazing things, and you've done amazing things in the past, and you are an amazing person to talk to.
Likewise.
And thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me on. It's great to be part of your podcast, and I think what you're doing is really noble and special, and goes beyond. You've uncovered something that was kind of nobody ever did this, for instance, for recording, I think, right, as an example. But what you're doing is uncovering the mystery. And so, look, we've talked about so many of the factors. There are other factors. I have Jonathan Haas, who's the head of the percussion at NYU, and just a fantastic person and a learned teacher. And I once in a while I do something at NYU for him. It's a sort of master classes thing, and I start by telling people, think about this very carefully. He says, don't do that. He says, you're just there to provide information and inspiration. And I embrace his point of view. But there's a part of me, because of who I am, that thinks, okay, this is what you want to do. You want to move to this first of all, shows generally don't run very long, right? Right? And there are loads of guys, great musicians, who have had shows and don't have them now, right? And then, so that's, then you're also talking about being in a city which is outrageously expensive, very dirty, very noisy, very angry, right? And overcrowded. If after all this you still want to do it, God bless, but think about it. If you have a piece of the pie somewhere and you're gigging and you're teaching and you're learning and you like where you are, New York is its own animal. You're taking something pretty heavy on, and there's lots of things going on between economics and politics and social things that are that make it more challenging than ever. So keep all of that in mind. The other thing that I think is also important to realize is that, and this happened with the jingle business, and I'm sorry, this is like a prologue, or is that, rather a monologue. But it would happen with the jingle business where it was centralized, and there were like 5 big jingle houses, right? And you could go to X, Y, and Z if you wanted to do those. They were the main. And then suddenly, everybody who had a computer became a jingle house, and the business became like factionalized and compartmentalized, and suddenly there was no central thing. This has happened to Broadway too. Every show, almost, is a new power structure. It might be a new conductor, might be a new associate conductor, might be a new composer, might be a new orchestrator, right? Somebody, and the contractors that we know of, the guys you've interviewed, might not be involved until the nucleus of the band has already been formed. So this makes it that much more challenging, because, it used to be the contractors could put you on shows with greater ease. Now the nucleus of the band might already be in existence before the contractors even brought on. So these are all various things to keep in mind, I just feel like it's important to know all of that, and when you're making an informed decision. Also, be able to read well. There are a couple of guys who've gotten by based on the fact that they can play well, but they don't read well. And there are people who don't want to tolerate that. So, get that together. And no one wants to wait on you while you figure it out because you can't read particularly well.
Yeah, especially when money's on the line and time is money. Yep. And they put something in front of you and they count things off. You just gotta sink or swim. And if you want to succeed, you better learn how to swim.
Indeed.
Great conversation, and looking forward to hanging one more time, or not one more time, many, many times over. And I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll come check you out whenever you're playing, and definitely keep me posted.
I sure will. Thank you so much, Clayton. Appreciate it.
We'll talk soon.
All right, man. Be well.
If you like what you hear on this show, subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter at BroadwayDrumming101.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published. Be sure to visit our new shop at merchandise.broadwaydrumming101.com. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.